Padre Pio was born on May 25, 1887, in the small village of Pietrelcina, Italy, receiving the name Francesco Forgione. From an early age, his family lived amid economic hardship, sustaining themselves with farm work. Despite their simplicity, his parents, Grazio Forgione and Maria Giuseppa, imparted to him a profound Catholic faith, cultivating from childhood a love for prayer and Marian devotion. Francesco grew up in an environment in which religion was not merely a practice, but the very essence of family life, rooted in traditions of daily prayer, mass, and frequent confession. This atmosphere shaped his character and paved the way for his future vocation. Even as a boy, Francesco displayed signs of an uncommon spirituality. Witnesses report that he had mystical experiences from childhood, such as visions of the child Jesus and the Virgin Mary. While other children gave themselves over to play, he preferred to spend long hours in church or in silence, reflecting on the things of heaven. This behavior aroused curiosity among the neighbors, but also a certain respect, for everyone perceived that there was something special about that child. His parents, though humble and without formal education, recognized the grace that surrounded their son. Despite his early piety, Francesco was not spared physical difficulties. From a young age, he suffered from health problems, including fevers and ailments that would accompany him throughout his life. His bodily fragility contrasted with the spiritual strength that was already manifesting itself intensely. This tension between an ailing body and a robust soul would be a constant feature of his biography, revealing how God chooses the small and the fragile to accomplish great works. Thus, his childhood was a prelude to his future mission, where suffering would be united to divine love. From adolescence onward, Francesco cultivated a strong desire for holiness. It was not a superficial religiosity, but a burning longing to unite himself to Christ in a radical way. He fasted frequently, devoted hours to prayer, and practiced rigorous penances, practices that impressed even the adults in his community. His interior life flourished quickly, anticipating the spiritual maturity that would lead him to the priesthood. Although simple and little educated, he radiated a divine wisdom that set him apart from other young people. At the age of 15, moved by this inner call, Francesco entered the Capuchin order, taking the name Friar Pio of Pietrelcina. The choice of name expressed his desire for humility, recalling Saint Pius V, the Dominican Pope who had been a model of austerity and fidelity to the Church. In the convent, he found the ideal environment to grow in prayer, study, and spiritual discipline. His life as a Capuchin friar marked the beginning of a path of total surrender to the crucified Christ. The novitiate, however, was not without trials. Friar Pio faced constant illnesses, health crises, that often threatened his permanence in the order. Even so, his superiors recognized in him a spirit of exemplary obedience and an uncommon purity of intention. He accepted each difficulty with resignation, offering his pains to God for the salvation of souls. This attitude revealed from early on his spirituality centered on redemptive sacrifice in perfect union with the mystery of the cross. During his studies and priestly formation, Friar Pio stood out for the depth of his interior life. He did not seek recognition or intellectual prestige, but intimacy with God. The disciplines of philosophy and theology were for him not merely an academic exercise, but paths for penetrating more deeply into the mysteries of the faith. His life of prayer intensified, and already at this time he began to experience deeper mystical phenomena which prepared him for the extraordinary experiences to come. On August 10, 1910, Friar Pio was ordained a priest in the Cathedral of Benevento. This moment marked the beginning of a priestly mission that would impact millions of faithful throughout the world. From his first Mass, it was clear that his Eucharistic celebration possessed a unique spiritual intensity, enveloping those present in deep reverence. The ordination was not only a personal achievement, but the beginning of a ministry that would transform Pietrelcina and later San Giovanni Rotondo into poles of spirituality. However, shortly after his ordination, Padre Pio's health began to decline again. He needed to return to his homeland several times to recover, which took him away from community life. Many thought his ministry would be limited by illness, but Providence had other plans. These periods of suffering became occasions to intensify his union with the crucified Christ, maturing his vocation and preparing him for the more demanding spiritual missions that awaited him. Thus, the first part of Padre Pio's life reveals a path marked by simplicity, by pain, and by grace. From a humble childhood to priestly ordination, everything points to a man chosen by God to be a living sign of the suffering Christ. His path up to this point was only the beginning of a life that would become a testimony of holiness, marked by extraordinary gifts, by persecution, and by unconditional love for the Church. After his ordination, Padre Pio went through a period of intense spiritual experiences that would mark him deeply. While other priests exercised their ministry in a more discreet manner, he began to undergo extraordinary mystical phenomena. From a young age, he had already reported struggles with demonic forces, visions of heaven and hell, and moments of spiritual ecstasy. Such experiences intensified after his ordination, bringing with them both consolations and sufferings. His heart burned with the desire to unite himself to Christ, yet at the same time, he bore the weight of spiritual battles that pursued him night and day. One of the most striking aspects of this phase were the visions of Jesus and Mary. Padre Pio reported encounters in which Christ showed him the gravity of human sin and the need for souls willing to make reparation for the offenses against God. On these occasions, he felt called to offer his life as a victim for the conversion of sinners. It was a profound call to sacrifice that manifested itself not only in prayer, but in intense physical pains. Few understood this dimension of his interior life, which was already beginning to stand out as something singular within the Italian clergy of the time. At the same time, the battles with the evil one became ever more frequent. Padre Pio recounted that the devil attacked him physically, leaving marks and bruises on his body. Many who lived with him witnessed strange noises, objects in motion, and evident signs that a spiritual battle was taking place. These experiences did not distance him from God, but strengthened his conviction that he was called to be a warrior of prayer, interceding for souls in danger. Padre Pio's spiritual life from early on was marked by this invisible combat. Amid all this, he maintained his priestly life with simplicity. He heard confessions, celebrated Mass, and dedicated himself to the common practices of a Capuchin friar. Nevertheless, his way of celebrating the Eucharist already made an impression. Those who attended his Mass reported that he entered into deep ecstasy during the consecration, remaining for long minutes in contemplation. His bond with the mystery of the altar was so intense that many felt the real presence of Christ in a palpable way. This drew more and more people to his celebrations, which became moments of profound spirituality. It was in this context that the first visible signs of the stigmata began to manifest. In 1911, he reported feeling intense pains in his hands and feet, similar to the wounds of the crucified Christ, although there were not yet visible marks. These sufferings were accompanied by great physical exhaustion, leaving him increasingly debilitated. He sought to hide such experiences, sharing them only with his superiors and confessors. His humility did not allow him to boast of something he considered an unmerited grace, yet which also placed him before an even heavier cross. During the First World War, Padre Pio was called up for military service, but his fragile health led to his discharge. This period coincided with his definitive transfer to the convent of San Giovanni Rotondo, which would become his dwelling place until the end of his life. There, isolated on the heights of Mount Gargano, he would live the most intense experiences of his mystical life and would become known throughout the world. It was in this small, seemingly insignificant convent that God chose to make the holiness of his servant shine forth. In San Giovanni Rotondo, the mystical phenomena intensified. In addition to the invisible pains of the stigmata, Padre Pio began to experience heavenly fragrances, prolonged ecstasies, and bilocations, that is, the capacity to be in two places at the same time. Reports from soldiers and the faithful confirmed his miraculous presence in distant situations, even when he physically remained in the convent. These extraordinary facts were interpreted by the faithful as signs of God's action, while some skeptics raised suspicions of exaggeration or superstition. On September 20th, 1918, after a mystical vision of the crucified Christ, Padre Pio received the visible stigmata in his hands, feet, and side. The wounds bled constantly and remained open, exuding a floral fragrance that astonished those who drew near. This phenomenon made him known throughout Italy and later, the world. However, the stigmata were not only an outward sign, but also a source of terrible pains that would accompany him until his death. He accepted such sufferings in a spirit of reparation, offering everything for the conversion of souls. With the stigmata, Padre Pio attracted the attention not only of the faithful, but also of the church and civil authorities. Many went to San Giovanni Rotondo to see him and to witness the wounds. While some were deeply converted, others accused him of fraud or hysteria. The Church, prudent, initiated rigorous investigations to examine the authenticity of the phenomena. Padre Pio, for his part, never sought to appear. On the contrary, he wished only to remain hidden in Christ. He said that the wounds were a painful burden, not an honor. Thus, the first mystical phenomena of Padre Pio placed him at the center of admiration and controversy. His simple life as a Capuchin friar was transformed into an extraordinary testimony to the power of God, but also into a field of spiritual and ecclesial battle. While the faithful saw in him a living sign of the passion of Christ, the Church sought to discern with prudence. It was only the beginning of a path that would unite glory and persecution, suffering and holiness. As Padre Pio's fame grew, tensions around him also increased. On the one hand, crowds flocked to San Giovanni Rotondo, attracted by reports of miracles, stigmata, and extraordinary conversions. On the other hand, critical voices arose inside and outside the Church, questioning the veracity of the phenomena and the authenticity of His Holiness. Many doctors, journalists, and even clerics claimed that the stigmata were the result of psychological suggestion, religious fanaticism, or even self-induction. This division around his figure would become a constant in his life, bringing him hidden sufferings, but also opportunities to practice a heroic obedience. The Church, prudent in its discernments, instituted various investigations into the phenomena linked to Padre Pio. Doctors were sent to examine the wounds, psychologists evaluated his behavior, and ecclesiastical superiors drew up reports on his conduct. The results were contradictory. While some confirmed that there was no natural explanation for the wounds, others raised doubts about their origin. This uncertainty led the Holy Office to impose strict restrictions on the Capuchin friar, in an attempt to protect both popular faith and the Church's own credibility. Among the measures imposed, Padre Pio was forbidden to celebrate Mass in public and to hear the confessions of the faithful. These restrictions represented an immense pain for him, for at the altar and in the confessional he found the essence of his priestly mission. However, instead of rebelling, he accepted them with absolute obedience, repeatedly saying, "I would rather be obedient to the Church than work miracles." This stance revealed his true holiness, not in the extraordinary gifts he possessed, but in the humility of submitting to ecclesiastical decisions, even when they caused him suffering. During these periods of restriction, Padre Pio intensified his life of prayer and penance. He spent long hours before the Blessed Sacrament, offered his sufferings for the Church and for sinners, and sought consolation in the certainty that obedience was the highest way to love God. Many of the faithful, indignant, revolted against the measures, but Padre Pio always exhorted them to respect the authority of the Church. He understood that, even when treated unjustly, it was necessary to remain faithful to obedience. This docility made him an example of a priest wholly submissive to the divine will. Despite the persecutions, testimonies of extraordinary graces continued to multiply. Reports of physical and spiritual cures spread throughout Italy. People who arrived in San Giovanni Rotondo in a state of despair returned renewed after a simple blessing or a word from the friar. Soldiers, anguished mothers, the sick and sinners found in him a channel of divine mercy. This increased even more the contrast between his popular fame and the distrust of part of the hierarchy, prolonging a situation of tension that would last for decades. One aspect that marked this period was his intense activity in the confessional. When authorized, Padre Pio spent up to 16 hours a day hearing confessions, treating each penitent with firmness and tenderness. Many left transformed, convinced that they had experienced the presence of Christ in the sacrament of reconciliation. Some reported that he had the gift of reading hearts, revealing unconfessed sins, and helping the faithful to achieve a sincere conversion. This charism made San Giovanni Rotondo a true center of spirituality, attracting pilgrims from all over the world. The growth of this flow of faithful, however, also aroused jealousy and intrigue. There were priests who viewed with suspicion the attention Padre Pio received, fearing that his figure would overshadow the authority of the local church. Moreover, some investigations exaggerated their criticisms, going so far as to accuse him of manipulating the faithful or enriching the convent, accusations entirely unfounded. Padre Pio, for his part, never defended himself vehemently. His response was always silence, prayer, and obedience. This attitude disarmed even some of his opponents. Another point of controversy was the phenomenon of bilocation attributed to him. Testimonies reported his presence on battlefields, in sick rooms, and even in distant meetings. While the faithful interpreted this as a divine gift, critics alleged that it was a matter of popular invention. The Church, once again, preferred to maintain prudence without issuing definitive judgments. For Padre Pio, these manifestations were not a cause for pride, but for humiliation, as he considered himself only a useless servant before the grandeur of God. Even in the face of slanders, Padre Pio remained firm in his mission. His reputation for holiness grew year by year, and crowds continued to arrive at San Giovanni Rotondo seeking consolation and miracles. This duality, popular fame and ecclesiastical persecution, was one of the greatest sufferings of his life. He, however, offered everything to God in a spirit of reparation. This fidelity shaped him as a true disciple of Christ, who was also rejected and persecuted, yet remained faithful to the end. Padre Pio's heroic obedience during this period became one of his greatest lessons. While many expected extraordinary manifestations, he showed that true holiness reveals itself in the humble acceptance of God's will, even when it is manifested through human crosses. It was this silent obedience that made him an example, not only for simple faithful, but also for priests and religious. He showed that, above gifts, there is always fidelity to the Church, the bride of Christ. As the years passed, Padre Pio established himself as one of the most sought-after figures in the Church throughout the world. His convent in San Giovanni Rotondo became a true living sanctuary, visited daily by thousands of faithful. He was not only a priest who heard confessions or celebrated Mass, but an authentic spiritual guide. His simple words, often short and direct, had the power to transform hearts. He insisted always on the importance of prayer, confession, Mass, and the Rosary. For him, the spiritual life could not be a path of theories but of daily practice, lived with fidelity and love for God. Padre Pio insisted in a special way on devotion to the Virgin Mary. He recommended to everyone the habit of praying the Holy Rosary daily, affirming that Marian prayer was a most powerful weapon against evil. He frequently repeated, "Love the Virgin Mary and make her loved. Always pray the Rosary." This Marian devotion was the center of his spirituality and profoundly influenced those who listened to him. Many who approached him testified that the simple act of praying the Rosary with Padre Pio was an experience of deep union with God and with Our Lady. Among the extraordinary phenomena associated with the saint, the gift of healing stands out. Many sick people reported having been miraculously cured after his blessing, his prayer, or even merely by touching his clothes stained with blood from the stigmata. Doctors who followed some of these cases attested that there was no scientific explanation for the recoveries. Cures of cancer, paralysis, blindness, and countless other illnesses were attributed to Padre Pio's intercession. He, however, credited himself with no merit. He always said, "I am only a poor friar who prays. It is Jesus who heals." Another notable gift was the reading of souls. In the confessional, Padre Pio had the charism of knowing unconfessed sins, reminding the penitent of what had been forgotten or omitted. Many testified that when they tried to hide faults, they were surprised by the friar's firmness, who revealed what was hidden and called them to sincere conversion. This gift drew crowds, but it also awakened fear and reverence. Many pilgrims went to the convent with apprehension, conscious that before Padre Pio they could hide nothing, yet they left renewed by the grace of God's forgiveness. Padre Pio also became known for the phenomenon of perfume. Many faithful reported sensing a gentle fragrance of flowers, especially roses and violets, coming from him or from objects that belonged to him. This perfume was interpreted as a sign of his spiritual presence and was witnessed even at great distances. Cases multiplied of people who were praying at home and were suddenly enveloped by this heavenly fragrance, considered signs of Padre Pio's intercession on behalf of those who asked for his help. Despite all these extraordinary gifts, Padre Pio never wished to be seen as a miracle worker. His focus was always the salvation of souls. He insisted that the greatest miracle was not physical healing, but the conversion of a sinner. For this reason, he dedicated himself tirelessly to the confessional, where he spent from 12 to 16 hours a day. His heart burned with zeal for souls, and he accepted the sacrifice of long hours of listening and guidance, even when his body was exhausted and ill. There, more than anywhere else, his priestly mission was revealed in its fullness. Among his great concrete works, the construction of the Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza, House for the Relief of Suffering, stands out, a hospital intended to care for the sick with dignity and Christian love. Inaugurated in 1956, this hospital became a point of reference in Italy and in the world, uniting cutting-edge medical science with spirituality. Padre Pio saw in this work the fulfillment of a dream, to offer not only physical assistance, but also spiritual comfort to the sick. To this day, the hospital remains active, being one of the greatest legacies of his missionary life. The House for the Relief of Suffering was not merely a hospital, but a concrete sign of the Christian charity lived by Padre Pio. He affirmed that the poor and the sick were the treasures of the Church and that they needed to be treated with love and respect. Many donors and volunteers were inspired by his faith and contributed to making the project a reality. This gesture showed that His Holiness lay not only in mystical phenomena, but also in the ability to transform God's love into concrete works of mercy. It was faith translated into action, illumined by charity. Besides the hospital, Padre Pio constantly encouraged communal prayer. He strongly supported the creation of the Padre Pio prayer groups, which spread throughout the world. These groups had the mission of cultivating a life of prayer, especially through the Rosary, Mass, and adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. To this day, millions of people participate in these groups, continuing the spiritual legacy he left. This apostolic dimension showed that his mission was not restricted to the convent, but extended to the whole Church, preparing a worldwide network of prayer. In this period of his life, Padre Pio became a beacon for millions of Catholics who sought consolation and spiritual direction amid the upheavals of the 20th century. He lived through the two world wars, saw the expansion of secularism and religious indifference, yet remained a living witness to the power of prayer and fidelity to the Church. His life was a constant sign that despite the difficulties of the world, holiness was possible. And more than that, it was necessary for the spiritual renewal of humanity. Thus, Padre Pio became not only a holy priest, but a true spiritual father for generations of faithful. As he grew older, Padre Pio faced an ever harsher reality. His body no longer matched the intensity of his spiritual mission. The illnesses that had accompanied him since youth became more severe, adding to the constant pains of the stigmata. Moreover, he suffered from respiratory and heart problems that left him debilitated. Even so, he did not allow himself to rest. Until his last days, he insisted on continuing to celebrate Mass and hear confessions, even when his health no longer allowed for long hours. His perseverance was a silent preaching, to the very end, surrender to Christ without reserve. Padre Pio's final years were marked by deep physical suffering, but also by extraordinary spiritual maturity. He knew that his life was drawing to a close, but far from lamenting, he offered each pain as a sacrifice for the Church and for sinners. He used to repeat, "Everything is my Jesus," an expression of total surrender. For him, there was no sense in separating pain and love. The cross was the purest language of union with Christ. His fragile, spent body became ever more an icon of Christ's passion, preaching more than 1,000 words. Even with failing health, Padre Pio continued to draw crowds. Pilgrims came from all parts of the world, facing long lines for a blessing, a confession, or simply to attend his Mass. The convent of San Giovanni Rotondo seemed small in the face of the number of people who wished to see him. Many testified that, on approaching him, they felt an indescribable peace, a certainty of the presence of God. Others reported that a simple look or gesture from Padre Pio led them to conversion or inner healing. His life became one last great testimony of fidelity and love. The celebration of Mass in his later years was something unique and moving. Padre Pio could barely remain standing, but he was determined to preside over the Eucharistic sacrifice. The faithful saw in him a priest completely identified with the crucified Christ. His trembling hands, still marked by the stigmata, raised the host with effort, and tears ran during the consecration. Many who participated in those Masses never forgot the scene, for they perceived that they were witnessing not merely a rite, but the total union of a priest with the sacrifice of Calvary. In the last months of his life, Padre Pio underwent a mysterious phenomenon. The visible wounds that had accompanied him for decades began to disappear. Shortly before his death, the marks vanished completely, leaving no scars. This fact was interpreted as a divine sign that his mission was coming to an end, and that God, in his providence, was removing the visible signs so that the glory would remain only in interior holiness. The doctors who examined the phenomenon were perplexed, for there was no plausible scientific explanation. It was as if Christ had sealed his life with one last mystery. On September 22, 1968, Padre Pio celebrated his last Mass. It was a brief ceremony, marked by exhaustion, but also by an unparalleled spiritual intensity. He had scarcely the strength to raise his voice or lift the host, yet he performed each gesture with profound devotion. The faithful present reported that the moment was like a silent farewell, in which the priest consumed himself entirely upon the altar. It was the last time his hands, marked by suffering, united themselves to Christ's sacrifice before the community. On the following night, already in his room, Padre Pio received the last sacraments. He spent his final hours praying the rosary, as he had always done throughout his life. His lips murmured the Hail Marys with effort, while his eyes remained fixed on a crucifix. At 2:30 in the morning, on September 23, 1968, he serenely surrendered his soul to God. His last words were, "Jesus, Mary." With this invocation, he departed this world, leaving behind a life entirely consumed by love for God and neighbor. News of his death spread quickly, causing emotion throughout Italy and the world. Crowds made their way to San Giovanni Rotondo to pay him a last homage. It is estimated that more than 100,000 people took part in his funeral, transforming the small city into an immense sanctuary of faith and devotion. For many, it was not merely the farewell to a priest, but the living testimony of a saint who had gone through the world bearing the marks of Christ. The tears of the faithful mingled with the joy of the certainty that Padre Pio was now with God. After his death, countless reports of miracles attributed to his intercession began to arise. People from different countries testified to cures, conversions, and extraordinary graces obtained by asking for his help. San Giovanni Rotondo, which was already a center of pilgrimage in his lifetime, became even more a sacred place, visited by millions of faithful every year. Padre Pio's body, surprisingly well preserved, came to be venerated as a holy relic. The devotion grew, strengthening the conviction that his holiness would be officially recognized by the Church. Padre Pio's final years and death were the consummation of a life entirely given to Christ. His witness was not limited to extraordinary phenomena, but found its apex in silent fidelity, in the acceptance of pain, and in total self-surrender. He not only spoke of Christ, he lived Christ in every gesture, in every tear, and in every prayer. Thus, he ended his mission on earth, but opened a luminous path in heaven, becoming one of the greatest saints of the 20th century. His life was now a flame lit that would never be extinguished. After Padre Pio's death, popular devotion did not diminish. On the contrary, it grew in an impressive way. Crowds continued to make pilgrimage to San Giovanni Rotondo, bearing witness to graces and miracles attributed to his intercession. For the Church, the challenge was to discern this devotion with prudence and to evaluate his life in the light of the Gospel and the Magisterium. The beatification process was then initiated, which required detailed analysis of his life, his writings, and the countless reports of miracles. The investigation revealed the richness of his spirituality, his absolute fidelity to the Church, and a life marked by charity and sacrifice. The beatification process also required the proof of miracles. Numerous reports reached the Vatican, but only a few were subjected to rigorous medical analysis. Among them stood out inexplicable cures of serious diseases without any plausible scientific explanation. After careful investigation, the Church recognized the authenticity of the miracles and authorized the beatification. On May 2, 1999, Pope John Paul II declared Padre Pio blessed in a ceremony that brought together millions of faithful in Rome. It was a historic moment in which the Church officially recognized the holiness of that humble Capuchin friar. The devotion, however, did not stop there. Padre Pio's fame for holiness spread ever more throughout the world. Prayer groups multiplied, and millions of faithful bore witness to graces obtained through his intercession. A few years after the beatification, new miracles were analyzed and approved by the Church. Thus, on June 16, 2002, the same Pope John Paul II canonized Padre Pio, declaring him a saint of the Catholic Church. The canonization ceremony gathered one of the largest crowds ever seen in St. Peter's Square, confirming the love the people had for him. St. John Paul II had a special bond with Padre Pio. When he was still a young priest, he visited him in San Giovanni Rotondo and asked for his prayers for a gravely ill friend. Shortly thereafter, the woman was miraculously cured, a fact the future pope never forgot. During the canonization homily, John Paul II recalled that encounter and highlighted Padre Pio's life as a luminous testimony of fidelity to the cross and of limitless love for Christ and the Church. Thus, a holy pope canonized a saint in a momentous occasion for the whole Church. The spiritual legacy of Saint Padre Pio remains alive to this day. His insistence on prayer, confession, Mass, and the Rosary continues to echo in Catholic communities throughout the world. He left as his heritage not only miracles, but above all a path of holiness accessible to all. To live each day with faith, to endure sufferings with patience, and to remain faithful to Christ and to the Church. His writings, letters, and spiritual counsels are read and meditated upon by thousands of faithful, serving as a guide for those who seek holiness in daily life. The Padre Pio prayer groups, spread across all continents, are a concrete expression of this legacy. They gather to pray the Rosary, to participate in Mass, to adore the Blessed Sacrament, and to practice works of charity. They are a spiritual extension of his mission, keeping alive the flame he kindled in San Giovanni Rotondo. These groups show that Padre Pio does not belong only to Italy, but to the whole universal Church, being a powerful intercessor before God and a model for all Christians. Another important aspect of his legacy is the Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza, the hospital he founded. To this day, the institution is a reference point in healthcare, uniting science and faith. It is not merely a medical center, but also a place where the sick find spiritual comfort, exactly as Padre Pio dreamed. This hospital continues to be a sign that Christian charity must not be limited to prayer, but must also be translated into concrete actions of love and mercy. In this way, his work remains alive and active, serving as a testimony of an incarnate faith. The spirituality of Saint Padre Pio is also remembered for his famous phrase, "Pray, hope, and don't worry. Worry is useless. God is merciful and will hear your prayer." This message, simple yet profoundly evangelical, has become a motto for millions of faithful. It sums up Padre Pio's total trust in divine providence and teaches that faith does not eliminate difficulties, but gives strength to face them with serenity. This phrase continues to be repeated, printed on images, and meditated upon as a true counsel for spiritual life. Today, Saint Padre Pio is considered one of the most popular saints of the Catholic Church, alongside figures such as Saint Anthony, Saint Francis of Assisi, and Saint Teresa of Calcutta. His devotion crosses borders, cultures, and languages, reaching millions of hearts. He is remembered as the saint of the 20th century, a living witness that holiness is not a distant ideal, but a reality possible for all who open themselves to the grace of God. His life is a permanent invitation to unite oneself to Christ through prayer, the cross, and charity. The legacy of Saint Padre Pio is not only the past, but the present and future of the Church. He continues to inspire priests, religious and lay people to live their faith with radical commitment. His intercession is sought in moments of pain, and his life is studied as an example of obedience, humility, and love. Thus, Padre Pio remains not only as a saint of the past, but as a spiritual guide for new generations. His witness, marked by suffering and fidelity, is a flame that illuminates the Church and leads the faithful to the heart of Christ.